It was 11:47 p.m. on a cold March night when Steph Curry's phone rang, cutting through the silence of his Atherton mansion like a desperate scream in absolute darkness. The sound echoed through the Italian marble corridors, reverberating through the 900 square meters of a house that had become a symbol of success, but at that moment felt strangely empty and vulnerable. Steph was relaxing in the main living room after a convincing Golden State Warriors victory over the Los Angeles Lakers by 118-104. Still feeling the adrenaline from the game coursing through his veins like residual electricity. He had scored 42 points that night, including 9 three-point shots that made the Chase Center crowd explode in collective delirium. But now, 3 hours later, the euphoria had given way to the familiar tranquility that always characterized his Sunday nights at home. The comforting scent of the vanilla candle that Isha always lit after games still lingered in the air-conditioned room, mixing with the residual aroma of chamomile tea he had prepared to relax his tense muscles. The children were already sound asleep upstairs, Riley, Ryan, and Cannon exhausted after a day full of family activities that had included a walk through Golden Gate Park, a photo session for a family magazine, and the traditional Sunday dinner that had become sacred in the Curry family routine. Isha had gone upstairs to the bedroom about an hour, Ego to take a hot bath and do her nightly skincare routine, leaving Steph alone with his post-game reflections and the quiet satisfaction of another important victory in the regular season that was approaching the playoffs. The iPhone 14 Pro was charging on the tempered glass coffee table when the name Dad flashed on the OLED screen, accompanied by the profile photo Steph had taken of Dell during the last Christmas. His father genuinely smiling while holding Cannon in his lap, an image that perfectly captured the essence of the Curry family patriarch. Steph instinctively smiled seeing the name, imagining that Dell was calling to congratulate him on the night's performance, as he occasionally did after particularly impressive games. Maybe he wanted to comment on that sequence in the third quarter when Steph had hit 4 consecutive three-point shots, each one more difficult than the previous, leaving even the ESPN commentators speechless. But when Steph answered with an animated, "Hey, Dad!" expecting to hear the familiar and proud voice he had known for 35 years, what came from the other side of the line made his blood freeze instantly. Deep and uncontrollable sobs. Broken breathing that sounded like someone who had been crying for hours. And then, a voice that Steph could barely recognize as his father's. "Steph, son, I made a terrible mistake." Dell Curry's voice was completely unrecognizable, choked by decades of repressed emotions that had finally found a crack through which to escape like water through a cracked dam. It was the sound of a 59-year-old man who had carried a silent emotional weight for so long that he could no longer sustain the burden alone. A man who had reached the absolute limit of his capacity to keep feelings to himself. The contrast was devastating. Dell Curry had always been the unshakable pillar of strength for the extended family. The former NBA player who faced 16 years of professional basketball pressures with unquestionable dignity. The father who raised 2 sons who also became exceptional professional players. The man who always maintained composure and rationality even in the most challenging moments life could present. Steph had seen his father face severe media criticism during his own career. He had seen him deal with injuries that threatened the family's livelihood. He had seen him navigate the complexities of raising children in the internet and social media era. But never, in 3.5 decades of life, had Steph heard Dell Curry cry. "Dad, what happened?" Steph asked, immediately sitting on the edge of the Italian leather sofa, all the fatigue from the game instantly disappearing from his body. "Did someone get hurt? Where are you? Is Mom okay?" "I'm at home in Charlotte, son," Dell managed to respond between heavy breaths. "Your mother is fine. She's sleeping. Seth is fine too. I spoke with him earlier. It's about you, Steph. It's about us. It's about everything I never said and should have said decades ago." Steph felt his heart accelerate dramatically. The living room, which moments before had felt cozy and familiar, now seemed cold and threatening. The shadows created by the soft lighting transformed into indistinct shapes that seemed to press against him from all sides. Have you ever felt that terrible moment when someone you love is clearly suffering in a way you've never witnessed before, but you can't completely understand why or how to help? "Dad, you're scaring me," Steph said, his own voice beginning to tremble. "Tell me exactly what's happening. What mistake do you think you made?" Dell took several deep breaths, desperately trying to compose himself enough to form coherent words, but emotion continued leaking through every syllable like blood through an inadequate bandage. "Steph, today I was organizing some important documents in my office, preparing tax papers for the accountant, and organizing files that had been messy for months, when I found a box that I had kept for years in the back of the closet. An old shoebox that contains things about you." Steph frowned, genuinely confused by the direction the conversation was taking. "What kind of things about me, Dad?" "Newspaper clippings from literally all your important games since Davidson College. Photographs printed on photo paper of every significant moment of your career that I could find. Handwritten letters that I wrote to you over the years, expressing my pride and admiration, but that I never had the courage to send." Dell made a long pause, and Steph could hear his irregular breathing through the phone, along with indistinct sounds suggesting that his father was handling papers or objects. "And when I opened that box this afternoon and saw everything organized chronologically, each clipping dated, each photo carefully preserved, each letter written by hand, I realized I made the biggest mistake of my life as a father." "What mistake, Dad?" Steph asked, his voice coming out softer than intended. "You were always an incredible father to me and Seth. You supported us, guided us, set an example for us." "No, Steph," Dell interrupted him with a firmness that contrasted with his evident emotion. "I wasn't the father I should have been. The mistake I made was never making completely clear how deeply proud I am of you. During all these years of your professional career, I kept my pride in silence, as if it were a secret treasure that only I could know and appreciate." The confession came out like a river that had broken a dam after decades of accumulated pressure, carrying decades of contained emotions that finally found a channel of expression. "I mistakenly thought I was being respectful of your independence, that I was letting you shine alone without the additional pressure of an ex-player father trying to live through his son's extraordinary achievements. But now I realize, with a clarity that devastates me, that maybe you grew up and built your career thinking that I wasn't proud enough, that I didn't adequately value what you were achieving." Steph felt his heart accelerate even more, beating against his chest as if trying to escape. For years, especially at the beginning of his professional career, he had questioned Dell's apparent emotional reserve regarding his growing achievements. While other NBA players' fathers were frequently seen and heard publicly celebrating their sons' successes, giving enthusiastic interviews, posting on social media, appearing on sports programs to discuss paternal pride, Dell always maintained a significantly more discreet, almost distant posture, which Steph had interpreted in various ways over the years. Sometimes Steph thought it was simply Dell's naturally reserved personality. Other times he wondered if his father was trying to avoid direct comparisons between his own achievements as a player and Steph's. And in moments of insecurity, which came more frequently than he'd like to admit, Steph questioned whether Dell was really impressed with his feats or considered them normal within family expectations. "Dad, let me finish, son, please," Dell said, his voice gaining an urgency Steph rarely heard. "This has been consuming me for months, keeping me awake at night, making me question every interaction we've had about your career. I saw other fathers being more vocal and demonstrative about the pride they feel for their athlete children, and I began to question whether you interpreted my discretion as lack of enthusiasm or, worse yet, as disinterest." Dell made a pause that seemed to last an eternity, and Steph could hear his heavy and irregular breathing through the phone, along with what sounded like pages being turned or papers being handled. "Steph, you cannot imagine, not even in your wildest dreams, what it is for a father to watch his son not only reach his own childhood dreams, but surpass them in ways that not even in the most ambitious fantasies could I have conceived. What's most impressive is how sometimes the people we love most in the world are the ones who least know how much we love them, simply because we assume our love is obvious, when in reality it might be hidden by our own caution," Dell continued, his voice gaining strength as words repressed for decades finally found freedom to exist in the world. "When you were playing at Davidson College, I religiously watched every game on television when I couldn't be physically present at the gym. I recorded all the games on DVR, paused at specific moments to study your plays, made detailed notes about how you were evolving technically and mentally as a player." Steph was completely silent, absorbing every word like water in the desert. "When you made that absolutely incredible performance in March Madness in 2008, taking Davidson to the Elite Eight and becoming a national sensation overnight, I cried alone in my office for more than an hour. Not from sadness, but from pride so intense that my body didn't know how to process it." "I didn't know any of this, Dad," Steph said, his voice coming out as a whisper. "Because I never said it. And that was my terrible mistake, son. I thought demonstrating too much public enthusiasm would be inappropriate, or worse, that it would seem like I was trying to promote myself through your growing success, as if I was trying to claim credit for achievements that were purely yours." Dell made another long pause, and Steph could visualize perfectly his father in the office in Charlotte, surrounded by physical memories and emotional regrets that had accumulated like dust during years of well-intentioned but misinterpreted silence. But the absolute truth is that there is no prouder father on the entire planet Earth, Steph. Not just for your extraordinary achievements in professional basketball, but for the man of integrity you've become, for the dedicated husband you are to Isha, for the present and loving father you are to your daughters, for the consistent way you use your platform and global influence to do good in the world. The first tears began to form in Steph's eyes, blurring his vision of the familiar room that suddenly seemed completely different, as if he were seeing everything through a new emotional lens. "Dad, I always sensed that you were proud of me." Sensing and knowing with absolute certainty are completely different things, son, Dell responded immediately. "And that's the tragedy that consumes me now. Knowing and feeling deeply are totally distinct experiences. I should have shouted to the entire world how extraordinary you are as a person and as an athlete. Should have said that to you every day, after every game, after every achievement, after every moment that made me feel like the luckiest person in the universe to be your father." Steph got up from the sofa and began walking around the room, processing the overwhelming intensity of the most emotional conversation he had ever had with his father in his entire life. "Tell me about this box you found, Dad," Steph said, his voice still choked, but loaded with an urgent curiosity that surpassed even his emotional confusion. "Tell me about everything you kept." Dell took a deep breath on the other side of the line, and Steph could distinctly hear the sound of a chair creaking, suggesting that his father had sat heavily in his favorite leather armchair in the office, that same chair where Dell used to read basketball magazines when Steph was a child. "Steph, my son," Dell began, his voice still trembling, but gaining a determination that wasn't present before. "I need you to understand that this box isn't just a random collection of clippings. It's a meticulous, chronological, and obsessively organized archive of every significant moment of your journey from Davidson College to today." The sound of paper being handled echoed through the phone, and Steph could perfectly visualize his father carefully opening the shoebox that had become a secret vault of documented paternal love. "I have here in front of me," Dell continued, his voice gaining an almost reverent quality, "the first clipping I kept. It's from the Charlotte Observer, dated November 18, 2006. The article's headline is, 'Dell Curry's Son Shines in College Debut.' You scored 15 points in your first official game for Davidson, and I cut out this 2-page article and kept it as if it were a family treasure." Steph stopped walking abruptly, leaning against the living room wall. He vaguely remembered that game. He was nervous, anxious to prove he deserved to be playing at the college level, but had no idea that his father had documented the moment so carefully. "But it doesn't stop there, son," Dell said, and Steph could hear pages being turned. "I have clippings from literally all your important games during the 3 years at Davidson. I have articles about when you were named Freshman of the Year of the Southern Conference. I have the entire page from USA Today when they did a special story about Dell Curry's son who is redefining college basketball." The emotion in Dell's voice was palpable now, not just sadness, but a complex mixture of pride, regret, and a kind of painful joy at finally being able to share these hidden treasures. "And here," Dell said, his voice breaking again, "here is my most precious piece from the entire archive. It's a photo I managed to print from a YouTube video. It's from that game against Gonzaga in March Madness 2008, when you scored 40 points and took Davidson to the Elite Eight." Steph vividly remembered that game. It had been one of the most important moments of his college career, the performance that put him on the national map and made NBA scouts begin to seriously consider him. "The photo I printed is from the exact moment you hit that 3-point shot in the last minute to seal the victory," Dell continued. "You're in the air, completely suspended, with the ball leaving your hand in a perfect trajectory. And in the background of the image, blurred but visible, is a person in the stands with arms raised in anticipatory celebration." Dell made a dramatic pause. "That person is me, Steph. I drove 4 hours from Charlotte to Detroit to watch that game in person. I arrived at the gym 2 hours before the start because I wanted to make sure I got a spot where I could see you clearly. And when you hit that shot, I screamed so loud that people around me turned to look. How is it possible that moments so significant to our parents go unnoticed by us at the time, only to be revealed years later as emotional treasures kept in secret?" "But I never told you about that trip," Dell admitted. "Never mentioned that I was there. Never talked about how I felt watching you make college basketball history right in front of me. thought it would be, I don't know, excessive, as if I was trying to insert myself into your moment of glory. Steph felt tears beginning to stream down his face. Dad, I would have loved to know you were there. It would have meant everything to me to know that you had driven 4 hours just to watch me play. And that's exactly why I made a terrible mistake, Dell said, his voice loaded with regret. I deprived you of knowing that you had the most enthusiastic support possible in the stands. Deprived you of knowing that your father was literally vibrating with every basket you made. Dell continued leafing through the box, describing item after item that he had collected and preserved over the years. I have here an entire section dedicated to your NBA draft period, clippings from all the mock drafts that mentioned your name, specialist analyses about your chances, a Sports Illustrated cover story called The Little Big Man. Do you remember that one? Of course I remember, Steph responded. It was one of the first important national stories about me. I bought 5 copies of that magazine, Dell admitted with a choked laugh. 5. 1 to keep pristine in this box, 1 to frame in my office, but which I placed so that only I could see it when I was sitting at my desk. 1 for my travel bag, 1 for the car, and 1 that I discreetly showed to close friends when they asked about you. Dell made a pause, and Steph could hear his breathing calming, slightly as he lost himself in the physical memories before him. But the most extensive section of this box, Dell continued, is dedicated to your professional NBA career. Steph, I have documented every milestone, every record, every achievement. I have clippings about your first game as a professional. I have articles about your first complete season. I have entire newspaper pages dedicated to each of your NBA titles. And here, Dell said, his voice becoming even more emotional, here are the letters I wrote to you over the years, but never had the courage to send. Steph stopped moving completely, all the muscles in his body tensing with anticipation. How many letters, Dad? 17 handwritten letters, Dell responded. 1 for each season of your professional career, plus some for special moments. Letters I wrote after games that left me speechless. Letters I wrote when you broke records. Letters I wrote when you won titles. Have you ever imagined how many important feelings get trapped inside people we love, waiting for courage or opportunity to be expressed? Can I read one of them to you? Dell asked hesitantly. One I wrote after you were named League MVP for the first time in 2015. Please, Dad. I would love to hear it. Steph heard the sound of paper being unfolded, followed by a moment of silence, while Dell probably read silently before sharing aloud. My dear son, Steph, Dell began reading, his voice trembling with each word. Today, you were officially recognized as the best basketball player on the planet. NBA MVP. Just 3 words, but they carry the weight of all the dreams you've had since childhood, and that I've had for you since the day you were born. Dell paused to compose himself before continuing. But while the entire world celebrates your impressive statistics, 23.8 points per game, 44% on three-point shots, leading the Warriors to the best record in NBA history, I'm thinking about different things. I'm thinking about the 6-year-old boy who used to sleep hugging a basketball. I'm thinking about the teenager who never complained when coaches doubted him because of his height. I'm thinking about the young man who chose Davidson College when bigger universities offered more tempting scholarships. Dell's voice was breaking progressively as he continued reading. You didn't just achieve my most ambitious dreams for your career, son. You demolished them and built something infinitely greater in their place. You became not just an exceptional athlete, but a man I admire in all aspects of life. your humility, your dedication to family, your generosity, your faith. I love you more than any combination of words can adequately express. Your eternally proud father, Dell Curry. P.S. Your mother cried when we watched the awards ceremony on television. I cried too. But don't tell anyone. The silence that followed was filled only by the sound of two men crying on separate phones hundreds of kilometers apart, connected by an emotion that transcended physical distance. "Why did you never give me that letter, Dad?" Steph finally managed to ask. "Because I'm an emotional coward," Dell responded without hesitation. "Because I grew up in a generation where men didn't express feelings easily, especially not in handwritten letters full of emotion. Because I thought it would be strange that you might interpret it as excessive or as an attempt to insert myself into your moment of personal achievement." Dell took a deep breath before continuing. "But mainly because I was afraid of seeming like I was living through your achievements. You have to understand, Steph, being the father of a professional athlete, especially when you yourself were a professional athlete, is navigating a very thin line between support and intrusion." "What do you mean?" "I saw other NBA players' fathers who seemed to be constantly in the spotlight, giving interviews about their sons, posting on social media, appearing on sports programs. And I was afraid of becoming that father who seemed to be taking advantage of his son's fame." Dell made a pause, organizing his thoughts. "Christopher Lee, a family therapist I consulted recently, helped me understand that my caution in expressing pride publicly was, actually, a form of emotional protection. I was protecting my own ego from possible criticism about being an opportunistic father, but in the appuiur process, I possibly made you question the level of my pride." "Who is Christopher Lee? How did you get to him?" "Anthony Jang. Do you remember him? My friend since the Charlotte Hornets days. He noticed I was acting strange lately, always melancholic when the subject was your career. When I finally opened up to him about my regrets, he suggested I talk to a professional." Dell sighed deeply. "Christopher asked me questions I had never considered. Like, 'Dell, do you think Steph knows exactly how proud you are?' And when I answered, 'I think so,' he asked, 'But are you absolutely certain? Have you ever said that clearly to him?' And what was your response?" My response was an embarrassing silence of 5 minutes, followed by the devastating realization that I had assumed my pride was obvious, when in reality it had never been adequately expressed. The biggest mistake of a father is not making clear the pride he feels, Dell was discovering through therapy and forced introspection that night. "Steph," Dell said, his voice now loaded with a determination that wasn't present at the beginning of the conversation, "I have in this box physical evidence that I watched, documented, celebrated, and was proud of every significant step of your journey. But all of this was done in secret, as if it were a personal hobby, instead of a natural expression of paternal love. I have here a separate folder just with printouts of online articles I saved over the years. Stories about how you revolutionized the three-point shot, analyses about your cultural impact on basketball, interviews you gave where you demonstrated maturity and wisdom that made me overflow with pride." Dell made a pause, leafing through more papers. "And I also have a section that might be the most revealing about my cautious personality. They're printouts of drafts of posts I wrote for social media about you, but never published." "What do you mean?" "Dozens of drafts, Steph. Posts I wrote after big games of yours, expressing pride and admiration, but that I always deleted before publishing, because I thought it would seem excessive or unnecessary. Dell laughed sadly. I have here a draft post I wrote after you broke the NBA three-point record. It said, "Watching my son Steph break the historic three-point record is one of the proudest moments of my life. Not just for the statistics, but for seeing how he honors the game we love." I wrote that, reread it several times, and then deleted it because I thought it would be too much. How impressive it is to discover that someone we love loves us even more than we ever imagined, but simply never found the adequate way to express that love. "Dad," Steph said, his voice now firm despite the tears that continued flowing, "I need you to understand something. During all these years, especially at the beginning of my NBA career, I frequently wondered if you were really impressed with what I was doing." The silence on the other side of the line was deafening. Steph could practically feel the impact of his words hitting Dell like a devastating revelation. You questioned that?" Dell asked, his voice barely able to disguise the shock. "Steph, how could you question that?" "Because I saw other fathers being much more vocal about the pride they felt for their sons," Steph explained, beginning to walk around the room again, now with more determined steps. "I saw LeVar Ball constantly talking about Lonzo. I saw LeBron James Sr. always present and vocal about LeBron. I saw fathers giving interviews, posting on social media, appearing on programs." Steph made a pause, gathering courage to verbalize something he had kept for years. "And you, Dad, were always so reserved, so measured." I interpreted that as silent approval, but sometimes, in my moments of insecurity, I wondered if you thought what I was doing was just normal, expected. Nothing especially impressive. The sound that came from the phone was devastating. A deep sob followed by several seconds of irregular breathing. "My God, Steph," Dell finally managed to say. "My God, I failed completely as a father. I failed in a way I never imagined was possible." "No, Dad, you didn't fail." "Yes, I failed." Dell interrupted him with an intensity Steph rarely heard. "If my son spent years questioning the level of my pride, then I failed at the most basic task of a father, making my son feel valued and celebrated." Dell breathed deeply several times, trying to compose himself, but emotion continued overflowing. "Steph, let me read you another letter. One I wrote after you won your first NBA title in 2015. Maybe this will help you understand the magnitude of what I felt, but never managed to express adequately." The sound of paper being handled echoed again through the phone. "My son Steph," Dell began with a trembling voice. "Today you became an NBA champion. As I write this, it's 3 a.m., and I haven't been able to sleep since the game ended 6 hours ago. Not from anxiety or worry, but from a joy so intense that my body doesn't know how to process it." Dell made a pause, clearly struggling against emotion. "When you lifted that championship trophy, I wasn't thinking about basketball. I was thinking about the 8-year-old boy who used to sleep hugging a ball. I was thinking about the teenager who never complained when coaches underestimated him because of his height. I was thinking about the young man who chose Davidson College when Duke and North Carolina offered scholarships." Dell's voice began to break again. "You didn't just realize my wildest basketball dreams, son. You demolished them and built a cathedral in their place. You became something I didn't even know was possible to dream about. And more important, you became a better man than I ever was." Steph had to lean against the wall, completely overwhelmed by emotion. "I love you with an intensity that sometimes physically hurts," I'm prouder of you today than on any other day of my life. You are my hero, Steph. Your eternally grateful father, Dell. The silence that followed was filled only by the sound of two heavy and irregular breaths. "Why, Dad?" Steph finally asked, his voice broken. "Why did you never give me that letter? Why did you keep all this love secret?" "Because I'm an idiot," Dell responded without hesitation. "Because I confused humility with silence. Because I thought expressing pride publicly would be inappropriate. But I forgot that expressing pride to my own son was necessary." Dell made a long pause, and Steph could hear more papers being handled. "Steph, there's more. Much more. I have a letter I wrote after you were unanimously elected MVP in 2016. I have a letter from when you broke the three-point record. I have a letter from each of your NBA titles." "And there's a letter," Dell said, his voice gaining an even more emotional quality, "that I wrote after watching you and Isha renew your wedding vows. A letter about how you chose true love instead of letting yourself be corrupted by fame. How is it possible that a person can document so much love and never find courage to share it? Dad, why are you telling me all this now? What changed?" Dell sighed deeply. "Two things changed drastically, Steph. First, my conversation with Christopher Lee made me realize that my silence, which I considered respectful, could be being interpreted as disinterest or lack of enthusiasm. And second, and more important, last night I watched your game against the Lakers. You scored 47 magnificent points, but it wasn't your performance that hit me like lightning. It was something you said during the post-game interview." Steph frowned, trying to remember specifically what he had said. "When the reporter asked about your motivation to continue playing at a high level at 35 years old, you responded, 'I still play, trying to make my father proud of me. I want him to see that his son became someone special.'" The impact of his own words hit Steph like a revelation. He vaguely remembered saying something like that, but hadn't considered how it might affect Dell. "When I heard that," Dell continued, his voice breaking again, "my heart literally broke into 1,000 pieces, Steph, because it made me realize that after 12 years of exceptional professional career, 3 NBA titles, 2 MVP awards, historic records, you still had doubts about how I felt." "Dad, no, let me finish." That moment was my devastating epiphany. I realized I had failed so completely in communicating my pride that my 35-year-old son, one of the most successful athletes in history, still felt the need to make me proud. Dell made a dramatic pause. "Steph, you don't understand. You made me proud the moment you were born. Every breath you've taken since then has only intensified that pride. You don't need to achieve one more thing to make me proud. You just need to continue existing." Steph's tears now flowed, without any attempt at containment. "So why did you never say this before, Dad? Why did I have to discover this at 35 years old through a call in the middle of the night?" "Because I'm an emotional coward who grew up in an era where men didn't express feelings openly," Dell admitted. "Because I thought demonstrating too much enthusiasm would be inappropriate. Because I confused being a discreet father with being an emotionally absent father. But mainly," Dell said, his voice gaining strength, "because I was afraid of seeming like I was living through your achievements. I saw so many athletes' fathers who seemed to be taking advantage of their son's fame that I became excessively cautious to avoid that perception." Steph stopped walking and sat back down on the sofa. "Dad, Do you have any idea how many times I looked at the stands searching for your reaction after big plays? How many times I wanted to see you celebrating openly, screaming, showing emotion? I was celebrating, Dell said quickly. I was screaming internally, vibrating with every basket, feeling my heart accelerate with every play of yours. But I kept it contained because I thought it was the right thing to do. The right thing, Steph repeated, a note of frustration entering his voice for the first time. Dad, the right thing would have been to let me see how much you cared. The right thing would have been to share that pride with me instead of keeping it like a secret. The silence that followed was tense, loaded with decades of lost communication. You're right, Dell finally said. You're completely right, and I have no excuses. I made the biggest possible mistake as a father. I let my son question something that should never have been questioned. The biggest mistake of a father is not making clear the pride he feels, Dell said, repeating the words that had become the mantra of the conversation. Steph, can I ask you a direct question? Sure. Can you forgive me for all these years of inadequate silence? Can you give me a chance to correct this? To be the vocal and proud father I always should have been? Steph took a deep breath, processing everything he had heard in the last 2 hours. Dad, there's nothing to forgive. I always knew you loved me. I always knew you supported me. I wanted to be sure that you were impressed, that you thought I was doing something special. Steph, Dell said with an intensity that cut through all the emotion, you're not doing something special. You are special. You've always been special. Since the day you were born, you've been the most consistent and deep source of pride in my life. And from now on, Dell continued, his voice gaining fierce determination, there will never be doubts about this again. Never again will you question the level of my pride. Never again will I keep my feelings as if they were secrets. Have you ever felt that moment when years of misunderstandings suddenly dissolve into crystal clear understanding? Dad, can I ask you something? Anything, son. Can I have those letters? All of them. I want to read them. I want to understand every thought you had over the years. I want to know the proud father who existed in silence for so long. Steph, Dell said, and for the first time in the conversation, his voice sounded genuinely joyful. I'm going to do more than that. I'm going to digitize everything, organize it chronologically, and create a complete archive for you. But more important, I'm going to write new letters. Letters about who you are today, about the father you've become, about the future we still have together. And I promise one more important thing. Never again will you have to guess how I feel. From now on, my pride will be so obvious, so constant, so impossible to ignore, that you'll never again question whether you're making me proud. 3 days after that transformative conversation that extended until 2:30 a.m., Steph received a bulky package via FedEx. It wasn't uncommon to receive correspondence, endorsements, invitations, promotional materials arrived daily at his house. But this package was different. It came addressed with Dell's familiar handwriting, and in the sender field was written simply, Your proud father. Inside the carefully packed box, Steph found not just the original collection Dell had mentioned, but something much more elaborate. Dell had spent the 3 days meticulously organizing each item, creating a complete visual chronology of Steph's career, accompanied by a 12-page handwritten letter. My son, Steph, the new letter began. Here is the physical proof of a love that always existed, but that I criminally failed to express adequately. Each item in this collection represents a moment when I should have called you, hugged you, or simply shouted to the entire world how proud I was. Steph spent the next 4 hours methodically exploring the box's contents. There were hundreds of newspaper clippings organized in folders by year, each one with Dell's handwritten annotations in the margins, observations about specific plays, comments about technical growth, expressions of pride that had never been shared. An entire folder was dedicated exclusively to photos Dell had printed over the years. Not just official game photos, but screenshots of specific moments that had touched his heart. Steph hugging Isha after important victories, Steph interacting with young fans, Steph being respectful with journalists after difficult defeats. But what most impressed Steph was discovering a school composition notebook, one of those with marbled covers, where Dell had documented personal thoughts after watching games over 12 years. Handwritten entries dated and organized chronologically, like a secret diary of paternal pride. March 15th, 2008. Steph scored 40 points against Gonzaga in March Madness. I drove 4 hours to watch in person. When he hit that shot at the end, I screamed so loud that security guards looked in my direction. I couldn't stop crying in the parking lot. This boy is going to change basketball forever. June 7th, 2015. NBA champion. My son is an NBA champion. How does a father explain this feeling? I watched on TV because I couldn't get tickets, but I celebrated as if I were on the court. Sonia had to calm me down because I was hyperventilating from emotion. May 11th, 2016. Steph elected MVP unanimously. Unanimously! First time in NBA history. I'm so proud I literally couldn't work today. I spent the whole day calling friends telling them about my son. Page after page of documented pride, meticulously recorded love, admiration catalogued with the precision of a professional archivist. That night, Steph called Dell. His voice choked before he could even form complete words. Dad, I spent the whole day reading everything. I can't believe you documented every moment of my career with such care and detail. Every moment mattered to me, son, Dell responded, his own voice loaded with renewed emotion. Every achievement of yours automatically became an achievement of mine, too. Every victory of yours made me feel like I had won the parenting lottery. Dad, why did you never show me this notebook before? These annotations, they're more touching than any interview you could have given. Because I thought it would be strange, that it would seem like I was living through you in an inappropriate way, Dell admitted. But now I understand that sharing joy isn't invasive. It's love in its purest form. From that transformative March conversation, the relationship between Dell and Steph changed radically and immediately. It was as if an emotional dam of decades had been demolished, allowing repressed feelings to finally flow freely. Dell began calling Steph after literally every game, no matter the time or time zone. Conversations that lasted between 15 and 45 minutes, where Dell shared specific observations about the performance, expressed genuine pride, and simply celebrated having a son he admired so much. Steph, that shot you made in the third quarter today, over Giannis, with 2 seconds on the shot clock, was pure artwork, Dell said after a game against the Milwaukee Bucks. I watched the replay 17 times. 17! Sonia was laughing at me, but I couldn't stop admiring the technique and courage. More significant still, Dell began occasionally posting on social media about Steph, something he had religiously avoided for years. Not excessive or promotional posts, but genuine shares of paternal pride that touched thousands of followers. After Steph had an exceptional performance against the Boston Celtics, Dell posted a photo of them from the Davidson College era, accompanied by the caption, "Proud every day to be the father of this extraordinary man. Not just for the 47 points today, but for the person of integrity he is when the cameras turn off. Proud dad, Curry family." The post received more than 200,000 likes and thousands of comments from fans moved by witnessing such a genuine moment of family love. How incredible it is when we finally allow our love to be seen by the world, instead of keeping it hidden as if it were something to be ashamed of. During the playoffs that year, Dell was present at more games than at any other time in Steph's career. Not as a silent spectator trying to go unnoticed, but as a visibly proud father who was no longer afraid to show emotion. Television cameras frequently captured Dell in the stands, openly celebrating every big play by Steph, hugging Sonia after important baskets, even shouting encouragement that could be heard through the crowd noise. "Go, Steph! That's my son!" Dell was caught shouting during Game 5 of the finals, a demonstration of paternal pride that went viral on social media and melted hearts around the world. After Game 6 of the finals, when Steph won his 4th NBA title, Dell didn't wait for the official congratulations to end. He came down from the stands, walked across the court full of golden confetti and cameras, and hugged his son in the middle of the celebration chaos. "I love you, son," Dell whispered in Steph's ear, loud enough to be picked up by nearby microphones. "I'm prouder of you today than on any other day of my life. And I promise you'll never have to guess how I feel again." Steph hugged his father with an intensity that conveyed decades of love finally recognized and adequately expressed. "Thank you for finally letting me see the proud father you always were," Steph responded, tears mixing with sweat from the most important game of the season. That moment was captured by dozens of cameras and became one of the most shared images of the NBA season, not just as a celebration of sporting achievement, but as a universal symbol of family love, finally expressed without reservations. In the months that followed, the transformation in the Curry family dynamics became evident to anyone close to the family. Dell began participating more actively in family events, not just as a silent presence, but as a vocal grandfather who spoke openly about his children and grandchildren. During an interview on a former NBA colleague's podcast, Dell was asked about having 2 professional player sons. "Let me be clear about one thing," Dell said, looking directly at the camera. "I have the 2 most extraordinary sons a father could ask for. Steph revolutionized basketball in a way we're still trying to fully understand. Seth built a solid and respectable career through hard work and determination. But more important than any athletic achievement, they are men of integrity, dedicated husbands, loving fathers. And for a long time, I kept this pride in silence because I thought it was the respectful thing to do. But I recently learned that expressing pride in our children isn't invasive. It's necessary. It's our job as parents to make clear how much we value them." The interview went viral, not just among basketball fans, but among parents who identified with Dell's struggle to find the right balance between support and intrusion. Inspired by the transformation of his relationship with Steph, Dell also initiated similar conversations with Seth, discovering that there were similar patterns of inadequately expressed pride. "I realized I had made the same mistakes with Seth," Dell admitted to Steph during one of their post-game phone conversations, keeping pride as if it were a personal secret instead of a shared family celebration. The most significant change, however, was in how Dell began interacting with his grandchildren. Riley, Ryan, and Cannon began seeing a completely different grandfather. someone who openly expressed how much he loved them, who celebrated every small school or sports achievement, who wasn't afraid to show emotion. Grandpa Dell became much more fun, Riley, now 11 years old, commented during a family dinner. Before he was quiet and serious. Now he screams when I score goals in soccer and is proud of everything we do. Isha, who had observed the transformation closely, commented to Steph about the impact of the change. It's incredible to see how an honest conversation can change decades of family patterns. She said, "Your father was always loving, but now he's openly loving." And the girls are absorbing this, learning that love should be expressed, not just felt. 1 year after the tearful March call, Dell surprised Steph with a unique gift for his 36th birthday. It was a professionally bound book titled Letters to My Son, 17 Years of Pride Finally Expressed. The book contained all the original letters Dell had written over the years but never sent, plus 12 new letters he had, written in the year following that transformative conversation. Each letter was accompanied by relevant photos, newspaper clippings, and even QR codes that linked to videos of specific moments. This is my attempt to compensate for 17 years of inadequate silence, Dell wrote in the dedication. Each letter represents a conversation we should have had, a moment of celebration that should have been shared, a pride that should have been expressed aloud. But more important, this book represents a promise. The promise that I will never again keep my love as if it were a secret. The promise that my grandchildren will grow up knowing exactly how much they are loved and valued. The promise that the biggest mistake of a father is not making clear the pride he feels, and that I will never make that mistake again. Today, 2 years after that night call that changed everything, Dell Curry is known not just as a former NBA player or father of Steph and Seth Curry, but as one of the most vocally proud and emotionally expressive parents in professional sports. He learned that expressing pride in one's children doesn't diminish their independent achievements. It celebrates them appropriately. He discovered that sharing joy isn't invasive. It's love in its purest and most necessary form. And Steph learned that a father's love can be deep, even when it's not perfectly expressed, but that it's infinitely more meaningful and transformative when it's shared openly, without reservations or fear of judgment. Dell's tearful call that March night wasn't about a mistake that had caused irreparable damage. It was about a love that finally deserved to be known and celebrated. And sometimes, the most important admissions we make aren't about harmful things we did, but about good and essential things we failed to do for too long. Dell's terrible mistake was elegantly simple. He loved in silence when he should have loved aloud. And the correction was even simpler. Never again keeping pride as if it were a personal secret instead of a shared family celebration. Have you ever noticed how the most transformative conversations of our lives often begin with someone having the courage to be vulnerable about feelings they've kept for years? Because in the end, the biggest mistake of a father is not making clear the pride he feels. And the greatest blessing for a son is discovering that this pride always existed in abundance, was just waiting for enough courage to be expressed without reservations. Dell's call to Steph that cold March night became a milestone, not just in their personal lives, but an example for families around the world about the transformative power of honest emotional communication. And this transformation, this proof that it's never too late to begin expressing love adequately, will remain forever as evidence that the most important relationships in our lives can be redefined and deepened through a simple choice. The choice to be vulnerable enough to say what we really feel, when there's still time to make a difference.